Are you concerned about the growing influence of political extremism, hyperpolarization, and misinformation? Well, you're not alone. This is the American Values Coalition podcast, where we explore the root causes of these societal ills and provide you with strategies to counter them.
When the church gets tangled up with politics, so that politics is contaminating the church and that religious zeal is contaminating politics, so every election is apocalyptic. It's about the ultimate contest of good and evil and right and wrong. Then the church can't do its job and politics can't do its job, and that's how you get where we are right now.
I'm Nat Nasworth, Executive Director of the American Values Coalition. My guest is Jonathan Rauch. He's contributing writer for The Atlantic and Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution. Previously, he's the author of The Constitution of Knowledge, A Defense of Truth, which we did a webinar on this 3 years ago. This was about when we were first getting started at AVC. But that webinar, if you're interested, is still on our YouTube page. The title of it is Defending Truth with Jonathan Rauch and Pete Wehner. But today we're talking about Jonathan's new book, Cross Purposes, Christianity's Broken Bargain with Democracy. For those of you watching on video, that's what the cover looks like. That's about what the size is, gives you an idea. So welcome, Jonathan Rauch, to the ABC podcast.
I'm happy to be back.
So who did you?
Where you been keeping yourself?
Yeah, our previous webinar was called A Defense of Truth, and turns out it still needs defending. So we're still here.
I'll come back whenever you want me.
Yes, I appreciate that. So who is this book for?
Who for meaning what?
Who's your target audience?
I have two target audiences. The first are white evangelical Christians who think the church has gone off course and are looking for inspiration for a different way that brings it closer to the values of Jesus Christ and the values of James Madison, because they have a lot in common, it turns out. And the second is secular people like me who have not paid enough attention to the importance and need for healthy Christianity to keep our country together and keep our democracy above water.
So I'm in that first target audience. Probably our listeners are probably a split between both of those target audiences, but I think all of our listeners will fit in one of those target audiences.
Can I ask, do you identify as evangelical?
I do identify as evangelical, yes. And even though it's very much a contested term these days, evangelical to me, I became a Christian at an evangelical summer camp, and I've been in evangelical churches, participated in evangelical churches, led youth groups and small groups in evangelical churches. So, my whole belief system has been wrapped up in that. So it makes sense to me to call myself an evangelical, even though in the minds of many, they sort of associate evangelicalism with a political agenda that I do not adopt. So that's sort of why.
You would be in the camp of people who are not super pleased with the direction the church has gone in the last 10 to 20 years.
Right. So I would call it, yeah. So there's the split within evangelicalism. So I'm not pleased with the part of the split that has decided that that it's their job to get Donald Trump elected and to win political power and to use political power against their political foes. But I'm more so on the side of the evangelicalism who wants to welcome immigrants and to who sees political power as something that is shared, and we are part of a family of lots of different people who are all working at the table of democracy to advocate for and figure out where we can find common ground.
Well, Nat Nasworth, I wrote this book for you.
Okay.
I don't know if God hears the prayers of an atheist. Tim Keller told me he does, and if so, I'm praying for you.
Well, thank you. Well, so yeah, as an atheist, were you nervous about writing this book?
Yeah, very. Yeah, this book is an act of true chutzpah. I'm Jewish, and but have never been able to believe in God. It just from an early age, it didn't work for me. But I do identify as Jewish. The faith, the tribe of my ancestors, and I'm also gay, and grew up at a time when basically the number one adversary of equal rights for gay and lesbian people was the Christian church in America. So I grew up very much an outsider to the church with basically a pretty bad attitude toward the church. I thought it was hypocritical and cruel and bigoted, and I wasn't in those days completely wrong about it. Still not, unfortunately, completely wrong about it. But I have, the last 20 years, have seen both the collapse of Christianity in an unprecedented way and a rise in every kind of social pathology and political pathology in American life. People have sought comfort in pseudo religions and in partisan politics, and those just can't do the same work of filling people's souls and providing a theology and acculturating people into basic virtues. And we're coming apart. So here I am, the gay atheist Jew, saying, we made a mistake on our side of things. We forgot the importance of a healthy and vibrant Christianity. It's still a load-bearing wall in our democracy. So here I am.
Well, I mean, in your defense, I do think there's value in that. I think there's lots of examples where sort of outsiders are able to gain a different perspective because they are outsiders. So if you think of someone like Alexis de Tocqueville writing Democracy in America as not an American, but he's given those observations, would be one example. So, yeah, I do think is value in learning from people who are outside Christianity and what they're seeing.
Well, thank you. I hope so. I'm aware I could be on kind of thin ice. But, I have to tell you now, my book has received a warmer reception among Christians than it has among atheists. Because atheists are not really, they're not really willing to, as one put it, throw in the towel on the idea of a religion-free society. They still have that dream, and I'm just now convinced it's never going to work.
So you're saying there's some atheists who are opposed to pluralism, similar to how some evangelicals are opposed to pluralism.
No, they're very much for pluralism, but they're not for Christianity. And so their goal for years has been, to secularize America. They thought, as I thought 22 years ago, this book is an apology for an article I wrote, the dumbest thing I ever wrote, I call it, saying it's great that America is secularizing and that people are losing interest in religion, including Christianity, because I thought religion is dogmatic and divisive, and the less of it we have, the happier we'll be. And I was completely wrong about that. But there are people in secular world, maybe not that many, but some of the podcasters who've interviewed me from secular world saying, so really, are you saying that we have to have religion in order to have a happy society? Because they don't want to believe that. And I'm saying, at least for the time being, it appears that there is no substitute for the load-bearing wall of Christianity. So they're reluctant to say that. They are on board with me completely in saying, well, if Christianity is here, it should be more closely aligned with the values of Jesus and James Madison. That they have no problem with.
Do you find, is there also some who are more ambivalent about like outside Christianity, who are just more so take the position like, why should I care what's happening within the evangelical world?
I don't know. I don't run across that all that much. I'll tell you something, though, that I am seeing, which is a much broader recognition than 10 years ago, that there has been no effective substitute for the important roles that faith, and especially Christianity, and especially organized participatory Christianity, meaning the church, that there's no adequate substitute for that. And people who were hardcore atheists 20 and 25 years ago are now, it's not that they've started believing in God, but there's been a discovery that faith and faith traditions and the health of organized religion really matter. And I'm just part of that trend. I'm just one small element of it, one small person.
So I did my dissertation, it's a political science dissertation on the Christian right, and I was studying the Christian right during the George W. Bush administration, and mostly at the elite level, leaders in Washington, D.C. Um, and whether or not you agreed or disagreed with their policy goals, at that time, they were all working within the context of democracy, believed in democratic norms, believed in, their goals were through democracy and elections, basically. Um, why has that changed so much? Even like since you wrote this book, I mean, we've seen like just in the past month or two, Donald Trump, giving up on due process, just saying this week, trial by jury, we don't need that, and
Did he say that? I missed that one.
yeah,
Really?
um, yeah, he was criticizing judges who said that they needed a trial by jury, and in his words, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they want trial by jury. So
Yeah, where is that guaranteed as a right? I can't think of it.
yeah,
It'll come to mind. It starts with a C, something like that. Um, well, you probably know the story that there's been a rise of Christian nationalism, and that's something that's very hard to define. There is no one established definition because it's really a hodgepodge of different people saying different things. And you've got these movements that are pretty radical, like the New Apostolic Reformation and the Seven Mountains Mandate, and things like that, who really don't believe in liberal democracy as we know it and want to substitute what they call Christian rule, which really means rule by them. Christian nationalism, every scholar who looks at it, the thing that they all agree on is it's not Christian. It's not a religious movement. It is not rooted in the Bible. It does not involve prayer. It's not about the next world. It is rather a secular political movement about power in this world that appropriates the symbolism of Christianity. But what they mean by Christianity is more like white Christian civilization. So there's all of that. My book isn't really so much about that as it is about something that you mentioned right at the top of our conversation, which is the much larger number of white evangelicals who have, they're not hardcore Christian nationalists, but they have come to align very closely with the Republican Party and Republican politicians, and to associate that with the church. And those are the folks who are voting 80+% for the Republican candidate in every election since the latter half of the early 2000s, no matter who that candidate is, John McCain, Mitt Romney, Donald Trump, and so on. And those are the people of whom Ryan Burge, the country's leading religious demographer, has said that it's for that evangelical has now become a label that conveys less about your theology, being rooted in scripture, being born again, being missionary, than another way of saying conservative Republican. And you've in fact seen a change in the composition of the church where people who are there for the gospel have drifted out. White evangelical numbers have dropped sharply in this decade, huge de-churching movement. But people who are there for the politics are drifting in because they see evangelical as part of their political identity as a conservative Republican, and that's changing the complexion of the church. So that's what worries me more, because that's more of what's going on in everyday church life in America. And when the church, whatever church it is, gets tangled up with politics, so that politics is contaminating the church, and religious zeal is contaminating politics, so every election is apocalyptic. It's about the ultimate contest of good and evil and right and wrong, then the church can't do its job and politics can't do its job. And that's how you get where we are right now.
So, I mean, to the degree that it's partisanship, that I think there's some good news there in that we're not talking about tight connections. I think there are people within the church who can be reached if they're not like super into politics. It's just like every time a new election comes around, that these are the habits they formed. They're listening to habits of media consumption that are telling them certain things. So maybe there's some hope there in thinking about them having more loose connections that might be able to be reached.
Well, that's the hope. The people who are most unhappy about what's gone on the last 20 or so years with this, it's really a secularization of the white evangelical movement. Secularization means the church becomes less culturally distinctive and more like the surrounding society. And it's adopted many of the manners of the surrounding society, especially in politics and online. Not so much in church life or family life, but social media, for example. But the people who are most unhappy about that are pastors. This change, unlike the first wave of political alignment of white Protestantism, that was top down initially. That was Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson and Lou Sheldon and Paul Weyrich. This is back in the 80s and 90s. What's happening now is being driven by the pews. It's people coming to church and bringing the culture war with them, and they're saying, this country is on a path where it's throwing everything I believe away, and my kids could come home from school being, announcing they're changing gender, and they want to take that fight in the church. They want to say, we're fighting for survival in this country as Christians and as conservatives, and that needs to be what we do here in church. It's not necessarily a majority of the church, but it's some very loud people. And the pastors don't want to do that. Most pastors want to preach the gospel, but they're under all this pressure. So, they're bombarded on Monday morning with, why didn't your sermon do this or that? That was cultural or political. So they feel under siege in many cases. Tim Alberta wrote a wonderful book about his own church, which fell victim to this. But then, going to the point you made a minute ago, it also came out the other side. It did find a new equilibrium. And so that's got to be the hope. The church has been in trouble before many, many times. And it does its best when it recalls itself to the teachings of Jesus Christ and becomes more countercultural, more different from this world and more focused on the next world. That's in fact when it's strongest, when it's most appealing, when it's not trying to win votes in the next election.
And if you're a pastor listening to this podcast, we also have resources available. We've created a program especially for you called J29 Coalition. Head to j29coalition.com to learn more about that. Give us some more hopeful news. What are some other things, some advice you're giving to Christians on what to do about this current crisis?
Well, I point to an example which is very counterintuitive to a lot of Christians, and some will reject it outright, but I think there's a lot to be learned from it. And that's the path that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, aka the Mormons, are taking in their posture toward politics and culture. So if you'll take a fairly long answer, I could give you kind of a chunk of the core of my book.
I will.
Is that all right? I mean, I hate to filibuster, but
go ahead.
So the church has still been pretty good at discipling people in the ways of Jesus, making people more like Jesus in church life, family life, community life. But it has really fallen short in not having a teaching on how people should be discipled in civic life, which means social media and politics, basically. And because it hasn't really been in that space, secular values have flooded in, and politics have flooded in, and cable news has flooded in, and trolling online, and all the anger and fear that represents has flooded in. So one way to put the question for the church right now that people like me who are not Christians are wondering about is, can the church develop a Christ-like civic theology, which answers the question of how would Jesus want Christians to behave when they engage on social media and in politics? Not what should they believe on the issues. It's the how of politics, as Curtis Chang, who's a former pastor and leader of Redeeming Babel, has put it. So the white evangelical church has addressed that issue in a pretty unchristlike way. They've endorsed a lot of very mean and cruel and angry politics and politicians. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the United States is just as white as white evangelicals. Just as white as evangelicals. And it's just as conservative. And historically, it's trended just as Republican. Yet it made a decision starting over a decade ago, based deep in its theology, right down to the roots of the story of the Garden of Eden, that the way God wants Christians, and all people, in fact, to approach politics is in a spirit of what they call patience, negotiation, and mutual accommodation, what they call peacemaking. And the idea there is, instead of looking for conflict and trying to win, you try to engage with others in politics, not in a way where you give up on your values and you compromise them in a way, but a way that reduces conflict by enlarging the space to live together, finding solutions that allow more people to get along better. They call this peacemaking, and it's become, this civic theology is something they now talk about all the time. And I've seen that in action. They led two historic compromises, one in the state of Utah and then a more important one even in the US Congress, that expanded both LGBT rights, including the right to marry, which I'm a married gay man, which they deeply disapprove of. Homosexuality is a sin, and in their church you can get excommunicated for a same-sex marriage. But they helped push through a bill and helped conceive of a piece of legislation that enshrines my marriage in federal law, federal statute, in case the Supreme Court ever changes its mind, while also creating new set of religious freedom guarantees that churches like theirs will never be pressured by the federal government using, for example, nonprofit status or the tax break or contracts or federal dollars. They will not be pressured to recognize same-sex marriages. And this passed with the unanimous Democratic support and majority Republican support in 2022. And this is exactly what James Madison and the founders wanted us to do. They said, find ways to expand the space to live together. So when you go and you talk to the Latter-day Saints leadership about this, and you ask why they're doing it, they'll say, well, they'll talk a little bit about strategy, but what they'll really say is that this is what God wants us to do. And I'm not saying that evangelicals or Protestants or Catholics or anyone else should become Latter-day Saints. I'm not even going to wade into the issue of who's a real Christian and who's not. You guys can discuss that. I'm just going to say there is a model here for how a very traditional conservative white church can approach politics in a positive some way and actually achieve things in the United States Congress that advance their goal and make other people happier too.
Yeah, that's good. I think evangelical churches haven't been really good at teaching their political theology. And I think the mistakes have usually gone in either one of two directions. One is either like the Christian nationalists, like we talked about, in where they're hyper political on one end, But then the other mistake is to avoid talking about politics altogether because they're concerned about how the topic will divide them. And so what happens is in those churches is evangelicals will get their political theology from, Tucker Carlson or a YouTuber or a podcaster or something else like that. So they're not getting their
Yeah,
political theology from the church.
that's exactly right. And the pastors I've talked to and the pastors that have been surveyed are kind of deer in the headlights in this situation. Um, the second group, the first group wants to do politics in many cases, but the second group, they're like, how do I deal with this? As Curtis Chang, who I mentioned, put it, they're just hoping to white knuckle through the next election and get through it. And that's getting harder and harder. The pastors I interviewed say one talked about the battlefield mindset that people are bringing to church. And another just said it's harder and harder to keep their church together because of these divisive cultural influences. They're pretty alarmed.
Yeah. And the LDS, they have an advantage of being more hierarchical. So they can design this program and send it out to all their churches. Evangelicals, we have to, all pastors have to just get on, look for the resources, find the resources. We need to provide the resources for everyone to work on this problem.
Yeah, that's a big difference people pointed out. But I kind of think, you tell me, Nap, but it may be a bit exaggerated on both sides. So as hierarchical as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is, sorry, that's the name they prefer now. It's a little bit long. Despite that, it's not like they can snap their fingers and make everybody follow. It takes real leadership. And that's why they're working so hard at the top to communicate this philosophy. But there's a lot of people in the rank and file who are very conservative and really have their doubts about this whole program. So it's a shepherding process, as it is in any church. It can't be done by decree. And on the evangelical side, there is a lot of desire for change. There's a lot of people, I think, like you. You probably know people like you who remain very committed to Jesus Christ and still think of yourself as an evangelical, or maybe some people are ex-evangelicals, but they're not ready to give up on the church. And often Protestantism, as decentralized as it is, it has managed to effectuate change. Russell Moore, the editor of Christianity Today, who wrote a wonderful book called Losing Our Religion, which is all about this, says that the way change comes in Protestant land is it's not going to be some apocalyptic battle between, a MAGA church and an anti-MAGA church. It's going to bubble up from the bottom. It's going to be a new generation of young people. We have early signs that they're getting interested again in organized religion, that there's something missing in their lives and there's an itch there to scratch. And it's going to be pastors who are unhappy with the way things are, and it's going to be church plantings, and it's going to be in the small groups, and it's going to be more attractive than the politicized church, what I call the church of fear, the church that tells you, the other side is we've been bringing a knife to a gunfight, the other side is winning, we've got to fight back, and if we don't fight back right now, they're coming to close this church. Well, the most frequent injunction in the Bible, I'm told, certainly the Christian Bible, is don't be afraid. And a church that is not fearful, a church that is countercultural, as David French has put it, shiningly countercultural, that is about the next world and not this world, that is about the core teachings of Jesus. I think there's reason to think that would be more attractive to more people than what they're doing now. I mentioned the church is, white evangelical church is shrinking. It's just dropped like a rock the past 2 decades. So what they're doing now is not working. So maybe they should try Jesus.
Yeah, that's great. I just love that I'm hearing this from a gay atheist Jew. It's like, I'm just strange. Like, preach, brother.
Some people write me and they Christians, and they call me prophetic. One or two said that. And I'm like, well, I'm not a prophet. I'm just a guy. But I'll tell you, I'm the biggest. I sit here at the Brookings Institution in Washington in governance studies, and the thing that we worry about day and night is America, for that matter, is the democratic West, but is America becoming ungovernable? Can we keep this country together? And that's why I'm here. It's because I don't know that we can continue to survive the kind of polarization and politicization of everything that we're seeing. And if the church continues to pull in the opposite direction from doing the job of helping people be less fearful and more willing to find ways to live with and accommodate others, if it's pulling in the opposite direction toward fear and anger and polarization, everything else gets harder. So that's why I'm here.
Yeah, and I think you're right. We're seeing some of the same things as far as the hopeful part, that people really are fed up, and there's a new generation that wants to do something about this and affect change. So that let me leave you all on that hopeful word. And Jonathan Rauch, thank you for joining us again. That's the book is Cross Purposes: Christianity's Broken Bargain with Democracy. Thank you.
Thank you.